Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Monday afternoon webinar series from Corwin, your no-cost platform for superior professional learning. Today's presentation is the impact cycle, how instructional coaches can foster powerful improvements in teaching with our presenter, Jim Knight. Now, what I'd like to do is turn over the meeting to Maura Sullivan, marketing strategist for Corwin.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Before we get started, I'm going to quickly introduce Jim Knight, who really needs no introduction whatsoever. Jim has spent more than 2 decades studying professional learning, effective teaching, and instructional coaching, and is the uncontested authority on the subject. Jim is a research associate at the University of Kansas Center for Research on Learning and the president of the Instructional Coaching Group, where he offers institutes and long-term professional learning services. More than a decade ago, Jim pioneered and popularized the topic of instructional coaching, first in an article for the Journal of Staff Development, followed by his landmark book, Instructional Coaching, a partnership approach to improving instruction, which has been embraced by well over 100,000 educators. Jim went on to publish over a half dozen books for Corwin and has presented to more than 30,000 educators across 6 continents. Today, Jim is going to talk about the impact cycle, his all-new instructional coaching cycle for helping teachers and in turn their students improve in clear, measurable ways. Jim, I'll hand over the presentation to you.
Thanks a lot, Maura. I'm excited to talk about the impact cycle, the new book, and that was me back there. But I wanted to say a couple quick things. One of them is if you're on Twitter and you wanted to post something using a hashtag, we could use the hashtag impact cycle. And if you wanted to send a message to me, it's just JimKnight99. We have all the chat features to accomplish that, but if you talk Twitter and you want to do that, just please go for it, and I'll keep an eye on it. I've got my iPad open, and I've got it on the hashtag, and I'll see if anything pops up as I work my way through. I want to take somewhere between 35 and 40 minutes just to give a quick overview of some of the big ideas in the new book, The Impact Cycle. And I'm going to address these questions. How do we come to study this coaching in the first place, instructional coaching? What's the opportunity offered by instructional coaching, which is to say, what can instructional coaching do for students? But then what's the challenge? And how should coaches and teachers interact in a way that increases the likelihood of a positive outcome? And then what is it that coaches do, which is really this cycle here, the impact cycle. So I'll just take my time as I work through these things. Send your questions along. If you're watching this as a recording, you can pause it whenever you get bored and go get a coffee and come back, or maybe even something better. So I'm going to walk my way through a little bit by bit. First, I want to talk about this opportunity of instructional coaching and why I think it's really, really a critical thing. First idea is really a simple one, that better instruction will lead to better learning. And what we found in doing our work is that better changes in instruction that are sustained don't just happen by chance. They take intensive, positive, respectful, humane, powerful support. And to really move forward is going to require quite a bit of work. But if we do have coaching, we have the chance to have better instruction, which leads to better learning. And I'm not saying that instruction isn't already great. What I mean is that a culture of continuous improvement is going to give us the kind of schools our kids need, because more learning will lead to more students realizing their dreams. The data on the number of kids who drop out and the results, and for that matter, the number of kids who teachers who drop out is pretty significant. And so in the impact cycle, for example, one little thing I found out about dropouts was that about 2/3 of prison inmates are high school dropouts, and 1/3 of all juvenile offenders read below the 4th grade level. So if we could provide better learning by provide better instruction, it's going to have a huge impact on helping kids realize their dreams, and ultimately it's going to have a huge impact on our society. This is from 2008, so the information's a little dated, but there's recent information to say much the same thing. Amos in 2008 wrote that if the nation graduated 100% of its high school students 10 years ago, the money the additional graduates would have put into the economy would have covered the entire cost of running the federal government. So the simple idea that having coaches who create a culture of continuous improvement and a culture of learning can make for students realizing their dreams, teachers realizing their dreams, because teachers' real goal is to have an impact on kids' lives. And it can mean really something important for society, a huge movement forward. So it's not surprising that we've started to have coaches in lots of different places, recognizing this key notion that effective coaching leads to better learning. But the trouble is there's a challenge. And the challenge is that many instructional coaches, when you talk to them, admit that they're not really clear on how to do what they do. And that is a problem if you're the person who's the coach. You go into coaching with a real desire to have even more impact. And a successful coach has way more impact than just about anybody in the world, because not only do you affect the students of the teacher you're working with today, but every other student that teacher's going to work with. So that's an enormous potential for impact. Unless you're not sure what to do, and you aren't clear on how to interact with teachers, and you aren't sure what you need to do, and that lack of knowledge, not knowing what to do and how to relate to teachers, has an impact on people's perspective, because not having impact, they often end up giving up coaching. You might be listening to this right now and saying, the truth is, I don't really know what I'm supposed to do in this job, and because you don't know what to do, it's messing with your confidence, it's messing with your self-efficacy. So we have wonderful people who become coaches, and before they ever actually do something like the impact cycle, they resign because they're not having an impact. So the purpose of the impact cycle, for me, is to do the good for society, the good for students and teachers that can be done by creating a simple, powerful process that will help people overcome this ambiguity and know how to get through the process, know how to make a difference in kids' lives, and see measurable, unmistakable positive impact on kids' lives. So to succeed, coaches need to know what to do and how to interact. And those are the things I want to talk about today. It has great potential, and there's some key ideas. But I wanted to start off with just a little bit of information about where this idea of instructional coaching came from. I worked at the University of Kansas and still have a position there on a part-time capacity. And we were sitting around the table talking about a project that we had to do. We were working with technology teachers, and we wanted to use more inclusive teaching practices to reach more kids with special needs, particularly kids with learning disabilities. There was a large percentage of students who were taking technology classes who had learning difficulties, and our idea was pretty straightforward. We said if we can reach those kids through inclusive teaching, what's called content enhancement, it should help them get more out of that class, keep them in school, and it had great potential, we felt. So we decided that we would work with that group of teachers. We got a grant to fund the research. We wanted to find out if inclusive teaching would keep more kids in school, help them be more successful. And we sat at the table talking about implementation of the project, and one of us at the table said, if we're going to have the teachers do this, if we're going to help them implement these practices, we need to break it down so it's really clear for them to know what to do. We need to go in the classroom and model how to do it. We need to meet with them, shoulder to shoulder as a partner, to help them learn how to do it. It won't happen by chance. A workshop's not going to lead to any change. We really have to be with them and helping them learn the practices. And one of us at the table, and I can't remember who it was, but one of us at the table said, well, if we know that for this project, why don't we do it for all the teachers that we work with? And that day, our interest in coaching was born. The result of that in 2007 was a book called Instructional Coaching. And that book laid out a simple process. But after 2007, we kept refining that book using a process called lean design research, which is described in the new book, The Impact Cycle. The idea of lean design research, which we did for over 11 iterations with teachers, is we have a product or a process. Our process was instructional coaching. We implement it. We identify a roadblock or a friction point, something we need to work on. We invent improvements, and we repeat the process, just like as if we were developing any other kind of product, like a kitchen product or a sporting product. or some kind of process. So when we started out, there were a number of things. We learned how to use video and became central to the way we did coaching. We started with kind of a rudimentary goal setting process, and then we pinned it down to a very specific kind of goal setting. We struggled with the kind of questions we asked, and by going through this process, we came up with some very specific, precise questions to use. And moving through this lean design research process, we went through 11 iterations, and we landed on the cycle I'm going to describe today in this webinar. One more thing is, as we were studying this, we realized that the kind of coaching was a little different than what you would read in the literature, the kind of coaching that we would call instructional coaching. And different models have different places, but what we found is that if you're not careful to learn a model that matches with the kind of coaching you're doing, the expectations for the coach, you're going to be in trouble. If you hire one kind of coach to do the kind of work that's appropriate for another kind of coach, it's a little bit like hiring a dentist to do brain surgery. You have to have the right person doing the right thing. And influenced by a number of people's work, I was able to identify 3 different approaches to coaching. Now, generally, coaching is divided into 2 different approaches, the facilitative and the directive approach. But I believe there's a third way, and the third way is the dialogical approach. And I've described them in this little diagram here. And if you look up these things, facilitative, dialogical, and directive coaching, and my name, you'll find a little article I did for Corwin that lays out these basic ideas. So what's the difference between these 3 approaches? Well, the metaphor for the facilitative approach is a sounding board. A facilitative coach is listening to the person they work with, but they don't share any expertise, and they work from the assumption that the teacher already knows what they need to do. They position the teacher as a decision maker. The focus of the coaching is on the teacher, and what happens in that approach is that you focus on questioning and listening, but we assume the teacher knows what they need to do, and we don't share expertise. Facilitative coaching is probably the most popular form of coaching in the world right now. If you have an executive coach or a coach who's helping you, a life coach, chances are that person takes the facilitative approach. It's almost, it's just not acceptable, really, to share your expertise. Michael Bungay-Stanier talks about the advice monster and how we have to be really careful about withholding what we share. Although I think Michael's work is a little more dialogical. If you go to the right side of the diagram, directive coaching is the opposite of the facilitative approach. In the directive approach, the metaphor is an expert-apprentice situation. The coach has expertise, and they're sharing it with an apprentice teacher. And in the directive coach is there to teach teachers new knowledge because they don't think the teacher has the knowledge. It might be a new reading program or a writing program or an approach to teaching math. And everybody needs to learn it, and the coach's job is to make sure they get it. The directive approach tells the teachers what they need to do. In fact, the directive approach, the coach kind of owns the fact that the teacher has to do it. If the coach is effective, people are implementing what they've told them to do. Focus there is on the teaching practice, not on the teacher or the student. And that's a model of advocacy, in the sense that advocacy is telling people what they need to do, explaining something that has to happen, advocating for a particular stance. Now, the midway in the instructional coaching way is the dialogical approach. The metaphor there is a partner. The assumption is teachers have an awful lot of important knowledge, but they need new knowledge. Like facilitative coaching, the teacher is a decision maker. And like the directive approach, the dialogical coach shares expertise. But the big difference between directive and dialogical is that they share their knowledge only when needed, and they always share it as an option in a way that's dialogical, which is to say they never say you need to do this, or this is what you have to do, or this is what fidelity is. They say, let me share some ideas with you, and you tell me what you think. The focus of the dialogical approach, at least as we describe it, is on the student. And the dialogical approach is the only truly dialogical approach, because if you're facilitative and not sharing your ideas, that's a one-way kind of conversation. And if you're directive and you're only sharing your ideas, that's not a dialogue. A dialogue is where both brains are actively involved in the conversation. It's a meeting of the minds. It's a sharing. And the dialogical approach truly respects the teacher's ideas and values and voice and knowledge, while at the same time, in an open and non-controlling kind of way, sharing ideas. And that's a big distinction between different approaches, and one of the core ideas in the coaching. Now, one more thing I want to share about the impact cycle is that there's an approach we take, and the approach is the partnership approach. If you just Google Jim Knight partnership approach, you'll probably pull up definitions of these principles, but they're most clearly described in Unmistakable Impact, although they're in the instructional coaching book. And in the new book, I have a really brief summary. I'm not going to go into all the definitions of all the different principles here, except to say the core idea behind the partnership approach is grounded in what we know about how people learn, how adults, in particular, professionals learn. We know that status is at play in most conversations, and many coaches have sat down with a teacher who crossed his arms and said, "So you're going to tell me how to teach? Is that the story here?" And what's happening there is a person who's saying, "I'm not going to embrace this unless I feel I'm getting the status I deserve." And you can see that particularly in Edgar Schein's work, helping, and a lot of his other work, but other people as well. Peter Bloch's Stewardship is a great book about that. The second thing, the idea of choice, is that people will not embrace something unless they have autonomy. The old saying I've said many, many times is that when you insist, they will resist. Now, choice doesn't mean you can just do whatever you want. And one choice is not on the table is choosing not to learn. I think professionals, by definition, need to be learning. But when we don't give people choice, what happens is the best we can hope for is compliance. Highly unlikely we'll get a deep level of commitment if people don't have a choice. I mean, just think about your own life as you listen to this. How easy is it for you to be told what to do? My phrase, and I may have heard this somewhere else, but my phrase is teachers love to learn, but they don't like to be taught. And the rest of the principles wrap around that. We want to hear people's voice. We want people to feel free to say what they think and comfortable expressing their ideas and have an input and shape the capacity to shape what they do. And we have a back and forth reflective conversation focused on real life that embodies this notion that when one teaches, two learn. The partnership approach is about two people sitting together, professionals, people with years of experience and degrees, professionals sharing ideas, back and forth thinking, not skilled laborers, but people that bring their brain to the job they do. And I think if we think about our children, we want professionals teaching them, not skilled laborers, not people reading from a script all the time. Not that there isn't a place for that, to learn a new practice, but ultimately we want people who bring their brains to the classroom so that they can inspire and ignite the brains of the children they teach. That's the partnership approach, and it's a key thing. So back here we have the impact cycle. The approach is the partnership approach. And the first part of the impact cycle, if we go back here, is the idea of identify. And that has three parts to it. We want to identify a goal, we identify current reality, and we identify strategies. Now, what makes instructional coaching, as I describe it, a little different than some other models of coaching, is we start with reality, not with a goal. I don't know how you can set a goal if you don't have a clear picture of current reality. And in the impact cycle and also in Focus on Teaching, I've written about how most people, not just teachers, anybody in any kind of career, don't have a really clear picture of reality. In fact, when we did interviews for communication for the book that eventually came out, Better Conversations, we found that people in their real life, and they look at their conversations, they get a video of their conversations, they're really kind of stunned by what they see. So we say the starting point for coaching is to get a clear picture of reality. It could be video. You could interview students. You could review student work. You could observe the class. And there's many tools we've got in the new book, and there's tons online. If you just go to corwin.com, look up the impact cycle, there are more than 50 forums and about 30 different videos that you can just access and see. But and quite a bit of information around observation. But the trouble with observation is if I don't have a clear picture of current reality and the coach comes in and observes my class, I might not agree with the teacher's observation or the coach's observation. But if I watch a video of my class, then it's pretty telling. Then it's kind of, I can't really hide from what I'm seeing. Sometimes I'm delighted. Sometimes video reveals something really wonderful, and I say, I want more of that in my class. And sometimes I look at it and I go, whoa, I wasted way too much time in that lesson. I need to figure out how to get my transitions from one center to the next from 6 minutes to 1 minute, because we wasted about 30 minutes of time. We could get it down to 4 minutes. We spread that over the year. We could make up months of instructional time. Now, I won't go into all the information on video except to say I wouldn't force it on people. I think it's a power tool, and I think people own the video. I think, in fact, if you push it on people, it's probably going to be counterproductive. But if I'm a coach working with a teacher, and we're really going to make a difference, we can't just talk about change. We have to actually act. You have to move from a culture of talk to a culture of action. And when you push the red button on the video and you record your class, you've moved from talk to action. Something's going to happen after that. Once you get over a clear picture of current reality, then you need a goal. And we messed around with goal setting for a long time. We tried SMART goals, and we read pretty extensively. I read pretty extensively in the goal setting literature. And we ended up with this thing, a peers goal. A peers goal is combines a lot of the key ideas and findings we had around goal setting. Powerful means it makes a socially significant difference in kids' lives. Easy means not that it's a sloppy goal, but it's easy in the sense of being simple, in the way that Steve Jobs said simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. An emotionally compelling goal is a goal that matters to the teacher. As Michael Bungay Stanier says, it's the goal that wakes you up in the middle of the night. It's the goal you think about when you're driving home. And when you have an emotionally compelling goal, a teacher who cares deeply about the goal, then the job of coaching is an act of service. You're helping them hit that goal. But to help them hit that goal, you need a reachable goal, which means I know what my finish line is. We know what it'll look like if we get there. Usually that's a number, but it doesn't have to be a number. We just have a clear sense of what our destination is. He'd call it a destination postcard. We know where we're trying to get to. And we've got a strategy to help us get there. The hope involves a destination and multiple pathways to get there, and a belief we can get there. And the reachable part is to essentially embody hope. And then the last thing is, over time, although we started out with teacher-focused goals, we found that student-focused goals are much more important. And those goals are usually achievement or behavior or attitude. An achievement goal is students can write a well-organized paragraph based on this checklist. An attitudinal goal is that kids come to class feeling hope. A behavior goal is that 90% of my students are authentically engaged in the class. Now, how to measure those things is a big part of the new book, describing those. But like I said, there are many tools online that if you're not quite ready to buy the book, you can go get the tools. Third part is to have strategies, teaching strategies. And I'm not going to spend much time on this, but it's a big part of the book. And that's the idea of having an instructional playbook, a set of teaching strategies that, as a coach, you know, when my teacher wants to increase engagement, here are some things we can do. When my teacher wants to increase the number of kids who read for pleasure, here are some strategies we can use. If my kids are not engaged or we're wasting a lot of instructional time, here are some strategies I can use. If I don't know how well my kids are performing and I want to get a better sense of their performance, here are some strategies I can use. The playbook, I think, should be a small number of high-yield practices that we know will help teachers hit their goals. And that playbook shouldn't be anything more than brief descriptions of those strategies. You shouldn't have more strategies than you can put on one page, and then the precise checklist you need to describe the practices. That's it. Don't make it too complex. Make it really, really teacher and coach friendly, and keep the playbook alive. Because over time, you should be learning. You should be getting better at your practices and refine it. So we have a goal. We have a set of teaching strategies, and that goal is based on the clear picture of current reality. So how do you get to the goal? Well, over a few years, mostly in Oregon, but also in Othello, Washington, where we did our other study, we refined our set of questions that we would use, and we came up with a set of questions that I call the identify questions. These are the questions we ask. After a teacher watches a video of their lesson, we say, on a scale of 1 to 10, how close was the lesson to your ideal? And what would have to change to make it closer? And what would your students be doing differently? What would that look like? How could we measure it? How should that be your goal? If you could reach that goal, would it really matter to you? What teaching strategies would you like to try to achieve your goals? Now, you don't do this mechanically, and you might add other questions. Just today, I've mentioned Michael a couple times, but Michael Bungay Stanier and I were talking for a podcast, and he said, I like to have a question. I said, sometimes I have a question that says, you didn't give yourself a 1, so what's so good about it? And Michael's response was, actually, why don't you ask them? I'm looking up my exact question here. Why didn't you give yourself a lower number? I think that's a pretty provocative question, too. But the goal of the identified questions is to arrive at a goal, one that really matters to the teacher, and to identify a strategy you can start with. That strategy could be, for example, using cooperative learning so kids can have more student voice. It could be using learning maps so kids can see how the content holds together. The idea is pretty straightforward. Let's figure out where we are. Let's figure out where we want to get to. Let's come up with a method to get there. And then in the process of the conversation, you're the one, that is the teacher we're working with, our partner teacher, is making the decisions. Now, if the teacher is going down the wrong road, and I from my perspective, and I'm concerned they're going to waste time, I don't silence myself, but I say it provisionally. I don't ever tell the teacher what to do. I just say, one thing that I thought about was this, what do you think about that? And keep the teacher as the person who's the decision maker. Now, the second part of the cycle, after we set a goal, is the learning part. We have identified a teaching strategy we want to work on. Let's say it's cooperative learning, or let's say it's different kind of questioning to increase learning in the classroom. We're going to use thinking prompts as the way to get that is, some kind of provocative item to get kids into the classroom discussion. Now the teacher needs to learn that practice. So when I am helping the teacher learn the new practice as an instructional coach, first off, I have a deep knowledge of it. We can't just figure these things out, I don't think, by doing a quick Google search and finding something. If I'm going to be effective as an instructional coach, it's going to be easier if I have a deep knowledge of the practices I'm sharing. That's why the playbook is so important. So let's say we want to improve questioning. I might have a checklist that helps me describe to the teacher what a good thinking prompt would look like. This is one you can download off the website. So a thinking prompt could be a video clip or a photograph or a clipping from the newspaper, something to provoke discussion. And the best ones we found are provocative, complex, personally relevant, positive, and inspirational, short, appropriate. So if I was a coach working with a teacher, I'd say, I've got this checklist, let's go through it, and you tell me if you want to change it. And if you want to modify it, we'll modify it. Usually, in my experience, when modifications are made, and they are frequently, the suggestions actually improve the power of the checklist. But if the teacher makes some modifications that move far away from so-called fidelity, I don't have to say that's not going to work. I might say, I'm not sure it would work. It's up to you, but I'm thinking this, but what do you think? And if the teacher said, well, I'd like to try it out, I'd say, well, we have a goal. Let's see. The goal is our objective standard for excellence. I don't have to say what to do. And here's another example of a checklist, maybe creating a safe environment for classroom discussion. I'd go through the teacher with these things, say, do we have norms? What do we need to do? Essentially, when we use checklists to describe our practices, and sometimes you just co-construct a checklist with the person. But the trouble we found was that often when we were describing teaching practices, we would forget stuff. And so the checklist now, instead of starting with a blank checklist as we did with instructional coaching, now we start with one with information on it, but we write all over it if we want to change it. And then we're precise but provisional in the way we explain the strategy. Then we offer to the teacher, would you like me to model it for you or set up some way in which you can see the practice? Now, if you walk down the halls of your school and you walk up to teachers and you say, do you want me to come in your classroom and model best practices? You're probably going to encounter some unpleasant nonverbal communication. But if what you do is you have a teacher who looked at a clear picture of current reality, set a goal, pick the teaching strategy, and then hears about the teaching strategy, and they really want to use it because they really want to hit this goal. They're troubled by these 4 kids in their class who are messing up the rest of the class for all the other students, and they want to get those kids on task, and there's some strategy you're helping them with. They will say, I'd really like to see this before I do it. Is there some way I can see it? And there are many ways. One way is to go in the teacher's classroom and model it. Many of you who are listening to this might do modeling. What we believe, though, is that you would model the whole class. You would just model the thing itself. And so if we're looking at how we ask questions, we might do maybe 15 minutes of questioning so the teacher can see what it looks like. We're going to use checks for understanding. We would model using checks for understanding in a small part of the class. Also, when we model, we're deeply respectful of the teacher, and we don't put on some big show to blow the kids away. It's not fair to the teacher that we take 4 hours of planning time to teach a lesson that she would have had 10 minutes to plan. So we keep it realistic to what a person could do, and that's a kind of a sign of respect. During the model lesson, if we go in the teacher's classroom, we communicate our respect and admiration for the teacher. We say things like, Mrs. Reichon, do I have this right? You're the expert here. And Mrs. Reichon, you kids are so lucky to have her. She knows more about math than anybody I know. When I need help, she's the person I go to. But sometimes modeling doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense if I don't know the content, and so I might co-teach. It also doesn't make sense to go in the classroom and model when behavior is the problem. Because if I solve the behavior problem, then the kids look at me and they see me controlling the class, and they look at their teacher and they go, huh, he can control us, but she can't or he can't. And it actually erodes the teacher's power base. And if I go in and model and the teacher's class doesn't respond to my class and it's still out of control, then there's really not much I can do except I feel your pain. So sometimes for behavior, it's better to model the lesson prior to the class. Or we could go watch another teacher, or we could watch a video. We co-teach. Sometimes we don't know the content, and we use other models when we're other approaches to modeling, and maybe some combination. Watch a video. I'll model it without the kids. Then we'll go watch another teacher, or I'll model it in your class. I do think going in the class is powerful, but not always the most appropriate way. So the simple idea behind modeling is you have to see it to learn it. We've seen again and again and again, people said, I didn't really get it until I saw you come in and show me what it looks like, and then I said, oh, I've got to do that. The last part of the cycle is the improvement stage, and here's the thing. So in the identify stage, we got a clear picture of current reality, we set a goal, and we picked a strategy to help us hit the goal. Then in the learning phase, we learn the strategy by me having some kind of precise explanation. I know the thing really well, and by seeing some form of model or some combination of model. But I've heard it, and I've seen it, and I'm ready to teach it. But usually what happens in the improvement phase is I implement it, and it doesn't work. As John Coltrane said, you got to set your course, but when you arrive, it doesn't always happen like you planned. And that's exactly what happens here. In that improvement phase, often things break down, and that's why the coach is so important, because without a coach, people will probably give up. So we set some simple ideas together about how to do the improvement phase, and we came up with these 4 parts. The first thing, when we're in that improvement stage, I just pointed to my computer screen. When you get to the improvement stage, is you confirm direction. And what that means is you ask the teacher what's on her mind that day. Or maybe you ask the question, given the time we've got today, what's most important for us to talk about? It's a question I heard from Susan Scott. At any rate, you want to figure out where the teacher is thinking right now. She's just had a really difficult time with one student, and it's really eating away at her emotionally. So you might want to just talk about that for a bit before you move into talking about what's our data show. I had a coach, Krista, that I worked with, and she's one of the 2 coaches featured with the Impact Cycle, whose videos you can see if you just go on the website. I sat down with her, and Krista had this one student in her class, a really sweet, really nice boy. And he was in a foster home. And she came to school one Monday, and he'd been moved to a different home. And she never got to say goodbye. She never saw him again. He was just gone. So when I said, what's on your mind, we talked about that student for a while. And then we got to talking about what we're going to do next for coaching. But had we jumped right in to look at the data and where we were, and I didn't know where she was, we wouldn't have had a very fruitful conversation. Second thing, reviewing progress, and there's a bunch of questions we've got that you could ask for this, but there are things like, have we hit the goal? What have you learned? What surprises you? And usually you look at the data to say, what's the data show us about how close we are to our goal? Third thing is to invent improvements, and really there's a few different things that can happen here. One of them is nothing. Many women say we haven't hit the goal, but we're going to hit it, and we just have to wait. So let's keep doing what we're doing and not change a thing. It's going to get there, but we're just not there yet. For example, shifting from closed questions to open questions. Sometimes the closed questions don't change much at all. But if you stick with it, you're going to see a big change. Same thing with positive attention. Wendy Rinke's research says if you increase positive attention, the disruptions will go down, but it won't happen right away. In fact, disruptions might go up before they go down. So sometimes you just wait it out. Sometimes you have to change the strategy. You thought the problem was cooperative learning or could be addressed with cooperative learning, but you realize we have to set some behavioral expectations in place and reinforce and encourage them. And so you shift your focus to a different strategy. Sometimes you like the strategy, but you say, this needs some work. It's not working exactly the way we need it. Like, for example, we might say, we really need really provocative thinking prompts to get these kids to talk more freely. Sometimes we have to change the goal. When we say this goal is actually going to be hit really easily, and we can be more challenging, more ambitious. Or we say we were a little too ambitious and we need to break the goal. Or maybe we want to break the goal down into a few steps, a few sort of landmarks or benchmarks we're going to get to as we move forward. Sometimes we have to change the way we measure the goal. Our measurements have to be reliable and valid. That is to say, somebody else will get the same thing as me. That's reliable, and valid is we're measuring what we want. One of the teachers, Kat Monroe, who's featured in the book, when I started to gather engagement data in her classroom, we could see the kids were not engaged. They were compliant, but they weren't engaged, not in the way she wanted. And so our data, though, all the kids filled in an exit ticket that said they were highly engaged. So our measure was reliable. It was the kids doing it, but it wasn't valid. It didn't match what was happening. So we had to come up with a different kind of measure. We moved to a thing called experience sampling. That's one of the things you can download. And then the last part is to plan next actions. Figure out when we're going to meet and what has to happen between now and then, who's responsible for it. And during the plan next actions part, I usually ask the teacher, before we close, on a scale of 1 to 5, how committed are you to the goal? With 5 being I'm really committed and 1 I don't care anymore. And if the score is really low, I say, well, what do we have to change to get your commitment up? Because without teacher commitment, you're not going to get there. So that's the idea. Identify a clear picture of current reality. Let me drop back to my little diagram. Identify a clear picture of current reality. Identify a goal, a compelling, powerful goal, a peer's goal, powerful, easy, emotionally compelling, reachable, student-focused. Identify a teaching strategy. Help the teacher learn the strategy through precise explanations and through modeling. And then make some adjustments along the way, sometimes changing the strategy, sometimes changing the way we teach the strategy, sometimes changing the goal, sometimes the way we measure it. Keep making adjustments until we hit the goal. I usually say to the teacher, I can't promise you what we're doing right now will work, but I can promise you eventually something will work. And I'm with you, and together we're gonna make this happen. So just a couple things. If you wanted more information, and we'll hear about other ways of doing more, but resources.corwin.com/impact cycle has about 50 free documents you can download. And there are, I think, about 30 videos of the coaching cycle, including one elementary and one secondary video, each of them about 45 minutes long, that shows the whole coaching cycle, the impact cycle from start to finish. And instructionalcoaching.com, on our website, in the resources section, there's lots of information about things you can download. And if you're interested in workshops or consulting or coaching, there are all kinds of things you can do. But just going there for the free stuff is a great idea. And on that website is my blog, Radical Learners, and there are, right now, there's about 10 videos I just put together the last couple months answering frequent questions about coaching. And speaking of questions, I'm going to turn it back to Jeff.
Terrific, thank you. I have some questions that have come in. Someone writes, I've read all of your books and you've helped me so much along the way. Sometimes I run into roadblocks and I don't know who to ask. How would a coach go about finding a coach for themselves?
Well, that's a big question. We believe the system should be structuring in coaching for the coaches. And so one of the big things we do is we coach coaches. But if that doesn't work, there are lots of other options. If you're on Twitter, my advice would be go to the EduCoach hashtag #EduCoach, and usually somewhere between 20 and 100 coaches come together every, I think it's Wednesday night at 8 o'clock. And you can ask people there, send them messages and get advice from them. There's lots of opportunities to learn with coaches. In other ways, too, we have a big conference, TLC, Teaching, Learning, Coaching, every year, and you can meet people and establish a kind of a relationship with them. But I think the quick way is EduCoach, and the more fundamental, systemic way is that coaches do have. Well, the other thing is people who are like you in your district, other coaches in your district. When we had coaches, we would meet every Friday afternoon from about 1 o'clock on, and we just dealt with whatever was coming up, and it gave us a way to, first off, spread things across the entire district, but also, learn from each other. Plus, the coaches emailed each other a lot. So there are many different ways. So I'm sure maybe for some people none of those would work, but just keep on the lookout for different ways it could happen, I guess.
Thank you. I have more questions. How do you get the veteran teacher to buy into inviting a coach to come in?
Well, I don't think we're responsible for what the teacher does. I see coaching as a partnership between two professionals, and I don't really think resistance. And I wrote an article for Kaplan called "Understanding Teacher Resistance," but I don't think really resistance is the issue. What the book "The Influencer" says by Patterson and his colleagues is that when people will do something if they think it's worth it, and if they believe they can do it. And so my question would be, which of those two things is keeping the teacher from doing it? Do they think it's not worth it, or don't think they can do it? Now, a couple key things is that I think it's important to identify a few people in the school who are highly influential and go to them and say, I would really love to work with you because I know if you do this, other people will do it too. But when you get together with them, you have to have a cycle to follow that's really going to make a difference. But if you make a difference in a teacher's life with the impact cycle, other people want to get on board. It'll spread like a healthy virus. And one last thing about this idea, this is a whole other webinar, but I think if a teacher needs to change and chooses not to change, it's going to be tough for the coach to be put in the situation of having to say, you have to change. To me, that's an administrative function. The principal is the one who would say, you need to change. And my phrase is, the principal should be firm on the standard, flexible on how to get there. Honor the teacher's professionalism, but also make it clear this is where you need to get to. And the principal can say, for example, look, way too much instructional time is being wasted in your class. That's got to change. It's up to you how you do it. Here's my data I got today. I'm going to come back. I'm going to check. I'm going to work with you. And there are a lot of ways you can do it. You might want to read Randy Sprick's book, Champs. You might want to go online and look at about reducing transition time. You might want to work with the coach. He's a pro at that. I don't care how you do it, but it's got to happen. The principal says there's no engagement here. You have to work with the coach. And then the teacher, rightly, I think, says this is kind of a punishment. But if the principal says we have to work on engagement, I'm going to work with you. We're going to make it happen. And one option is the coach. Then they see the coach usually as a lifeline and not a punishment.
Terrific. I have another question regarding flexible dialogue interactive. Should their use be situational, that is, depending on the extent of knowledge and motivation the teacher has, or is dialogue always best?
Well, dialogue includes the facilitative approach, I think. And so sometimes when you're a dialogical coach, you never move out of facilitative, maybe half the time, because the teacher really does know what to do and you really are just helping them discover it. But if I'm an expert in formative assessment and the teacher is really struggling with formative assessment, it seems to me silly for me not to say, oh, let me tell you what I know about the formative assessment and you tell me what you think, see if it's helpful. To me, the directive approach is where I'm telling the teacher what to do. I'm not just advocating for a strategy. I'm telling them what to do. When we do the dialogical approach, we advocate in a way that leaves room for the teacher to make the decisions. But if I'm telling the teacher what to do and doing all the decision making, I'm not sure that's going to be, given what we know about human motivation, I'm not sure that's going to be that effective. I don't deny that there may be times. Teachers got 6 weeks left, and they're going to be, moved out of the profession if something dramatic doesn't change. I might say, look, you've only got 6 weeks left. I'm just going to say, I think you need to do this. There may be times like that, but usually the directive approach isn't that effective because it isn't heard. You have to be. The goal is not to be right. The goal is not to push a perspective. The goal is to do what's best for kids. And usually, what's best for kids is involving the teacher, treating them like a professional, and involving their brain and their voice and their ideas and their choices. That's how I see it. Of course, everybody's free to choose to see it differently. So,
do these same strategies work for coaching administrators?
My only answer would be maybe. We haven't studied that. I think the impact cycle would apply in other situations. In fact, I just had a conversation yesterday about to what extent does this apply to students? Having kids set goals that matter to them and having it inform their instruction and treating them as equals, recognizing their humanity. So I think the thing is, if you're going to do it for administrators, you'd still need a playbook. Ray and Julie Smith have a new book coming out in January where they talk about how to use the impact cycle with administrators, and that's probably your best place to look for that. It's a Corwin book, and they really work hard to articulate how the impact cycle could be applied. That would be my first thing, but I haven't studied it. I think both Ray and Julie were administrators. They have great expertise in that area. They'd give you a much better answer than me.
Thank you. If we were to develop a multi-year plan for developing a system for coaching, what might a progression look like?
These are such little questions. Well, I have an article. You could probably find it if you Google it. And there's a column on the Radical Learners blog about this. Actually, it came out in 2015. There's 3 little articles. It says recent articles about coaching. And in that article, which was for principal leadership, I think, I identify 7 success factors for coaching. One of them is we understand how to work with adults. One of them is we have which is a set of principles like the partnership principles. One of them is we have a coaching cycle. We know what we're doing. It doesn't have to be the impact cycle. It could be some other cycle, but we're setting goals and hitting goals is how we assess if it's working or not. We have a set of teaching practices we know inside out. If we're instructional coaches, we can gather data that monitor kids or teachers as their kids move towards a goal, monitoring the students. In the impact cycle, there's an appendix. It's all about data and a toolkit. We have communication skills. My book, Better Conversations, is meant to address that. I'm not trying to sell all these books. Most of them, if you just Google around, there's tons of forums you can download for free. But that's just to explain what my perspective is. The coach has to be a leader of change. And so that means that at its core, the coach has to be responsive and respectful to teachers, but have their act together. Ambitious for change, on top of things, reliable, make things happen in a way that's deeply responsive to teachers. And the system has to support the coach. The principal has to not ask the coach to do things that are beyond their scope. They have to be aligned theoretically. That is, they understand what it means to work with an adult, that it takes a partnership approach. And so just people might be interested if they go to, it's not up there yet, but in a few days on the instructional coaching website, we're going to have a certification process for instructional coaches that addresses all of those things. So I guess what I would do is I would give my coaches the opportunity to be certified as an instructional coaching group certified coach and analyze all 7 of those areas. That's how I do it.
Thank you. Do you have research studies showing the impact of coaching on student achievement? We are constantly questioned by school board members and directors to show this type of data.
Yes, we have a study that's not released yet, but it's accepted for publication. And I don't have it at my fingertips, and it's not released yet, but the effect size was 1.02 on student engagement. The article by Bianca Rosa from a few years ago is probably the one that is most often mentioned. There's a few meta-analyses around engagement. I mean, if you just Google research on instructional coaching, a few things should pop up. But I should probably put together a blog on the research on coaching so people can address that. What I would say is it's not just does it work, it's what kind of coaching is it? And because, just to say coaching is kind of like teaching. I mean, it's such a big term. What the approach people are taking? Are they doing the facilitative or the dialogical or the directive approach? And do they have a cycle? What exactly do the coaches do? And I think that's an important thing to look at with respect to the research. But yeah, I mean, any effect size, often they say if it's over 0.15, John Hattie says 0.40 is the hinge factor for effective impact. 1.02 is a pretty high effect size. And that paper, I'm not sure when it's going to be released, but it's in the process of being published.
Do you think that a teacher who taught with a department and then became a coach has a different dynamic than one who comes to a school unknown? Is it a positive or negative dynamic?
I don't know. It is a different dynamic, but whether it's positive or negative probably depends on the school and depends on the coach. As we were doing our studies in the development of the instructional coaching book, and after that, I was supervised for 10 years our coaching project. And there were times when the coach was in the school where they started was a real advantage. And then there were times when we thought, kind of like an athletic coach being sent to another team, it was time for a change. What I do believe is the coach is going to succeed to the extent that the teachers trust the coach. And trust has a few elements. Is the coach competent? Is the coach benevolent towards the teachers? Is the coach reliable? Is the coach honest? And I've written about trust in a number of different places, but without trust, the coach isn't going to be successful. But if your teachers trust you and you help them reach more kids and make a difference, I don't think you'll encounter an enormous amount of resistance. Now, the trust might not be you; it might be the system itself engenders a lack of trust. But where there's trust and where there's competence and warmth, you're going to have people implementing.
Thank you. What other ways, beside the Woodruff scale, would work to measure the effectiveness of coaching in a district?
I think the key thing with measuring the effectiveness of coaching is are the coaches setting goals and hitting the goals. You need to articulate a peer's goal, powerful, easy, emotionally compelling, reachable, student-focused. And then you need to be able to show that the goal has been hit. The trouble with achievement scores as a measure of coaching, and I'm not saying you might be able to tease it out with value-added assessment in districts where that's being used, but the trouble is there's so much attached to it. What if you have a new principal or new teachers this year and your scores go up, coaching work. So to me, having it being measured specifically by the goals that were set and the goals that were hit. And if you use video, and you have video to demonstrate that change in some way, or you can look at student work to show clearly this is the way the kids were writing when we started, this is where we are now, and this is what our goal was. That, to me, is what's compelling.
Thank you. In terms of confidentiality, how important is it to have confidentiality regarding the teacher-coach relationship?
I think that's a district decision on what people want to do, but I'll give my opinion, which is that even more important than confidentiality is honesty. And what will get you in trouble is saying it's confidential and not honoring what you said. So I think the most important thing is to make sure that what we say about confidentiality is what we do. Now, in the broader field of coaching is usually confidential because when you see a teacher, you're seeing them at their weakest sometimes or most vulnerable, and it's not really fair to share that. Plus, people, if they know you're going to say whatever they hear, are going to be less open with you. Besides which, the principal should be in the classroom enough that they don't need to have the coach tell them what they're doing. They should be able to see what's happening. So I would say, if I was designing a system, I would suggest that the coaches are are very clear on what they're going to share and what they're not going to share. And I think they could share with administration who they're working with and what they're doing, but not share evaluative comments. Because my fear would be if the principal and coach if the coach is perceived as a kind of a quasi-administrator, teachers will hesitate to be open and vulnerable in the ways you need for learning to take place. But more important than that is that people are very clear on what will be shared and what won't be shared, and they live by what they said. Because if people sense you're being dishonest, the trust is gone, and they're not going to be coached.
And the last question I have is, does your book, The Impact Cycle, include pre-developed checklists to get us started?
Yeah, there's a complete impacts. There's a complete playbook in the learning, the coach's toolkit at the back of the book, and that involves dozens and dozens of checklists, but also one-page descriptions of the teaching strategies, the summary. It's exactly what I would think a playbook would look like. Not that people should adopt that. Every school is different. Every situation is different, and people have to create their own thing. But there is a model there they can look at, and there are also, on the link I gave, let's see where it is here, resources.corwin.com, Impact Cycle. There are many, many checklists on that website too.
Terrific. If there are questions we did not get to, I will send those to you, Jim, and you can answer those, and they can come along with the video that everyone will receive later in the week.
And I got wrapped up in the talk, so I wasn't watching Twitter, so I'll check there and do my best to respond if there are any questions on Twitter.
Terrific.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jim, for an excellent webinar, and thank all of you for having participated, particularly you East Coasters. Jeff, I think we have one more slide here. Is there a slide at the end? Yes. A special thanks for having attended. We are making available to you a 20% discount on Jim's 2 books. All you need to do is go to www.corwin.com and enter the promo code IMPACT. Also, before the end of the week, we will send all of you copies of the PowerPoint, the recorded presentation, and a certificate for having attended the webinar. So thank you. Have a wonderful evening, and come back soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.